I think the thing that made me want to write is the realization that all the other things that I was doing in my life were always going to be subordinate to that. I'd written a lot as a teenager, and somebody in my early 20s, I wrote half a novel and things like that. And then when I left university, I think I just did things that I thought were more expected. I went and did corporate jobs, and I did a master's, and I went through things that I thought that people like me were supposed to do. I didn't really know why I was doing them. And I was doing a corporate job for 4 years, and I was traveling around, and I found it very interesting and everything, but I was still waiting for that moment where I would kind of finally merge with this job, and I wouldn't have this sort of critical distance from it, and not this other stuff playing in my head. And that never happened. At a certain point, I started writing what later became my first book as a project for myself at the weekend. And I realized that this was what I was supposed to be doing. For me, what has motivated me in my writing is, in these two novels, is how do you tell a story of the contemporary world that is complex and reflects all the kinds of intensities that we feel about the contemporary world. And in each of the books that I've written, finding a structure and a form that's large enough and complex enough to hold all the things you want to say and all the feelings you want to convey has been the major challenge. And in each case, it was the moment when the structure became apparent to me that everything else fell into place. In Tokyo Cancelled, it was a bit easier because in a way I borrowed a very obvious structure, which was a structure known to us through Chaucer and through Boccaccio and the Arabian Nights, a series of folk tales or fairy tales with an overarching story in which people are telling those stories to each other. And so in Tokyo Cancelled, it was a structure that was very, very archaic, though the content of the stories themselves is in a way hyper-modern. And this contrast, this clash, pleased me because I felt that in opposite ways, partly because I felt that it would appear to the reader highly inappropriate that contemporary travelers caught in an airport would tell these kinds of stories, stories that have a link to the long history of storytelling. And I wanted the reader to ask themselves what it was that they felt about contemporary people that implied that contemporary people didn't have this capacity, that somehow they've been cut off from this long history of storytelling that we all know in some sort of way. In Solo, my second novel, it was a much more difficult structure to find. It took me a year of ripping up drafts before I found that structure. The structure that I ended up with was a book of life, which is a book of the true history of an individual, and a parallel novel, the book of Daydreams, which is the sort of fantasy life of the same individual. And it enabled me to do the thing that I wanted to do with that book, which was to talk about the immense loss of the 20th century, the things that were just made impossible by the violence and rationalization of the 20th century, and to invoke those through this kind of fantasy of a life never lived. The thing that initially attracted me to Bulgaria was, which became the setting for my novel Solo, was music. And when I heard Bulgarian folk music, I was very it was European. I mean, geographically European, but it was so remote and exotic that I wanted to find out more about where this place was and where this music came from. Writing has never been a solitary process. I of course need solitude to accumulate material and to write, but I have gathered around me a few people who are anyway involved with the same questions as I am in life through their own work. They're academics or artists or other writers, but also whose opinions I value very much. So these people read my work, some very, very frequently, and some just when it's finished or whatever. And without them, I would feel very exposed, and my work would be of a much lower quality. The act of writing is a sort of, it's a philosophical act in the sense that with every character you make, with every description you make, you are in some ways building a world. And the way that you see that world, the way you think about that world is implicit in every plot turn, every description of a landscape or whatever. And over the years, showing my work to people, discussing with people, I've learnt to think better about the world. I've learned to ask better questions. Whenever I think about the books that are very, very dear to me, for some reason they all seem to come from Central Europe. And I don't really know why it is that I feel this affinity with that part of the world, but going back to Kafka, Kafka is the writer that I return to most as somebody I think who just challenges everything I think I know about the world, and somehow through an entirely surreal picture of reality seems to deliver to me something more real than most of the writers I know. But I could step forward as well to W.G. Sebald, who is another writer I love very, very much, who's another person who manages to find a language for things that I think it's almost, as a writer you would spend years and years trying to find that a form in which it's possible to say the kind of things that he says. Amongst my own generation of writers, I think the ones that I admire most are Alexander Gemon, the Bosnian American writer, Edgar Keret from Israel. And I suppose in each case they deliver to me a kind of something that is closely observed, that arises from something very, very real that all of us know about things, about relationships, the world, and things like that, but delivered in a way that none of us could have ever imagined. Full, I think, of the paradoxes and absurdities of life.